Hey guys, in this video I show you the process of my newest oil painting Saber, which is very special to me. I created it for the current group exhibition Art Collector Starter Kit at Corey Halford Gallery in LA, the biggest and most known art gallery in the US that is dedicated to pop surrealism, street art and new contemporary art. If you are in or around LA, come by and see my work in person and also enjoy the works of a lot of very talented artists too. The show runs until December 28th and I will leave you a link to the gallery in the description of this video. I titled this painting Saber, which is a reference to the anime Fate Stay Night. When I started making the digital mock-up in Photoshop, the aesthetics immediately reminded me of the fantasy anime genre that often depicts tales like Jeanne d'Arc or the legends of King Arthur or other medieval themes. I'm always surprised and excited to see how the Japanese culture adapts and changes European tales and folklore. The funniest thing, seriously, is when I hear German words in anime. And that happens often, believe me. Oftentimes they use the German language to name attacks or characters, and it cracks me up. They pronounce the words so funny but at the same time so cool, because the Japanese voice actors just have the coolest voices anyways, that I just love it. And this painting is about how stories and tales evolve over time, especially when they travel through history and different cultures like Japan. The character Saber, for example, is from the anime Fate Stay Night, like I mentioned, which is based on the visual novel, which is inspired by the legends of King Arthur, which are based on the history of the kings of Britain, which is partly invented and adapted from legends and folklore even before the 12th century. Now, wrap your head around that. And almost every story, fairy tale, movie or legendary character has a history like that. I once googled the story behind Dracula and that totally boggled my mind. But that is a topic for another video. And now let's talk about the creation process of the painting. As I mentioned earlier, I started out with a digital mock-up that, once it was finished, I printed out in the size of my painting and then traced it onto my canvas with charcoal tracing paper. By the way, I will leave a link to all materials that I used in the description of my video, including the tracing paper. I use pre-primed canvases for my paintings, but oftentimes I also add a layer of silver or gold paint before I start my paintings. I either use oil paint or, if I am impatient, acrylic, because it dries on the spot and I can immediately start. For this one I used a silver acrylic paint as my underpainting to complement the color scheme of my composition. As always, when painting portraits, I start with the darker parts of my motif. Here we have the dark hair strands and the shadows in and around her eyes. I like to compare my style of painting, once I have laid down the shadows, to a caterpillar that eats its way through a leaf. What I mean with that is that I start somewhere and then continue my way around the spot and enlarge the area that I work on until everything is filled out pretty much. This way I can make sure to mix the right skin tones, because I can compare them directly to the adjoining colors. But what I also do is, when I have a certain color mixed and my brush is full of that color, I don't waste it and I add it to those areas where I can find that particular color too. For example, when I stopped painting on her nose and jumped to her neck, I still had a lot of midtones to add to the skin areas before I could continue adding the lighter parts of this portrait, so I did that first. Painting a portrait with oils is not the easiest thing to do, and it took me years to learn how to do it professionally and to be proud of my work. When I started out learning to paint on canvas, I was completely helpless. Now, after 10 years of practice, I developed techniques that are very powerful and, even for beginners, easy to follow. If you want to save yourself the frustration of finding everything out by yourself and wasting time trying things that don't work, I highly recommend to join me on Patreon, where you can find complete step-by-step, several hours long painting lessons, which you can follow along and learn all my tricks and techniques on how to do a realistic portrait with oils, like this one. All my lessons and tutorials are available for only $5 per month. If you go to an art school, you will spend lots of money and it's absolutely not necessary if you want to learn how to paint. I've also lots of other wonderful things for you to discover, like beautiful art surprises, original artworks, painting challenges, and more. Visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/Lioba or follow the link in the video description. Okay, back to the process. After I had painted her neck, I continued with filling in the remaining midtones of the portrait. To mix skin tones, I used yellow ochre, cadmium red light, and Naples yellow most of the times. But I vary my palette, and when my boyfriend, for example, buys a new paint, I'm eager to try it out. So don't feel that you have to use the exact same colors that I use. As long as you don't mix your paint too long and everything gets gray and loses saturation, you are fine. That is a beginner mistake that I went through a lot. Look which color you need, and if you overmix, with that I mean if your paint looks like mud, just start over and try to mix the color a bit better this time. It takes time to develop an eye for the right color value and tone, but it will come. Just don't give up and don't accept a color that looks like mud. Then after I filled in the midtones, I mixed a lighter variant of the skin tone for her cheeks and the areas of her face that received the most light. Since this is only the first layer of paint, the oil paint doesn't have a body yet and looks very transparent still. So I don't expect it to look very light or convincing yet. But if you add several layers of paint, you can create something that looks like actual skin with oils. It's very magical if that happens. I also used Liquid Original, which fastens the drying time, but a layer still needs 1 to 2 days to dry. But waiting is always worth it. After having finished the first layer of paint on her face, the next day I proceeded with the rest of the painting. Here again I started filling out the blacks first. There are many ways to paint a more complex motif. I could also have started the background first and then add the butterflies later, but this way I could paint everything in one session, which saves time and also didn't mess up the details of my underlying sketch. For the background, I mixed pastel tones and made sure to use thicker paint than in the portrait portion, because otherwise the underpainting would have still shined through and then I might have needed even more layers to be able to cover it. Then the butterflies were the next to paint, and oh my goodness, were they challenging. I probably painted hundreds of butterflies already, but they are still super difficult. I find it way easier to paint them on paper, board, or in a completely different medium like watercolors. But on canvas they are definitely the hardest to render. The trick is to paint a wing in only 1 or 2 brush strokes, and then to turn the canvas in the direction you can do that brush stroke with the most control. Since I am right-handed, I paint the best from left to right or from top to bottom. So when I paint the left wing and I start at the center of the butterfly, I need to draw my brush to the left, which would result in a weak, uncontrollable brush stroke. So in order to avoid that, I turn my canvas until I find the best position to hold the brush. Then after I finished the first butterfly and didn't mess it up, I was energized and more confident to complete the remaining ones too. In the case I would have had messed one of them up, I would have needed to wait until that layer had dried before I would have been able to correct it. Once I finished the butterflies, I continued working on her helmet and the wings. I planned several layers for the helmet. It had so many details that I wouldn't be able to finish it in the first attempt, so I left it quite rough. I painted the wings in a similar fashion, like the butterfly wings. For me, it made no sense to paint every feather individually. They look so soft and dynamic that I planned to paint them with only a couple of brush strokes. But first I had to lay down a layer with the major color values before I could do that. Then, after I had done that, while everything needed to dry, I continued with Saber's face. I added a complete second layer of paint in the same fashion as the first one. This additional layer gave the face more depth, and I could work on details that are important to me, like the smoothness of the lips, her bright blue eyes, and the softness of her skin, which I achieved with my dry brush blending technique. Visit my tutorial page on my website to learn more about my blending techniques. Then I moved on to refine the helmet until I was happy. Painting metal is something that I rarely do, so it took me longer than I anticipated. For the wings on the helmet, as I mentioned earlier, I only used a couple of brush strokes for painting individual feathers. I had to pay very close attention to the color values and tones before I added another part of the feather. It's easy to make everything look flat if you have the wrong color and you can only do a couple of brush strokes without correcting it, because when I lay down a brush stroke, the way it fades in the end looks like the tiny little hairs in a feather, and I had no way to correct that except for wiping it off. But luckily most feathers looked good and I was happy with the final result. And then, finally, to finish the painting, I only added a couple of translucent layers to bring everything together. Now I'm very happy how Saber turned out, and I especially like the pastel tones. If you are interested in adopting her, please contact Corey Halford Gallery for inquiries. I wanted to share with you the winners of Lioba's painting challenge from November. I hold this challenge every month for my patrons, and the first place goes to Kaita Thomas with her beautiful goddess. You can join at any reward tier and skill level. More info is in the video description. Last month's theme was stormy, and I was enthused to see what my patrons came up with. I've included the Instagram handles of the winners, so don't forget to follow them on Instagram. Now, if you're eager to see my newest videos, follow my new Instagram account Lioba's Studio that I dedicated to my painting videos. I plan to upload their new videos even before I release them anywhere else. The account is still very small, so if you want to help me out, don't forget to follow me there. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to comment, like and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next one. Bye!